Do you ever feel like you want to be better prepared for emergencies, but aren't sure where to start or how to find the time with all of your other responsibilities? We hear you, and that's where preparedness in your pocket comes in. This podcast is your portable solution for accessible emergency preparedness education. Our episodes are pocket sized yet packed with important preparedness information, making them easy to digest and learn from wherever you are. Preparedness in Your Pocket is brought to you by the Maryland Emergency Preparedness Network, a dedicated communications network providing no cost emergency preparedness education, training, and resources to home and community based professionals, patients, and their caregivers. My name is Kendal Lee, and I am the EPN's program administrator and your host. On behalf of the EPN, we invite you to make this podcast an essential part of your preparedness toolkit. Just like keeping your keys and wallets close, think of this podcast as your preparedness partner on the go, always ready to support you with valuable emergency preparedness tips. Join us as we empower you to be better prepared for emergencies, one podcast at a time. Welcome back to another episode of Preparedness in Your Pocket. I'm your host, Kendal Lee, and I'm so glad to have you here with us today. In our first few episodes, we talk with experts about tools that help us prepare for emergencies, such as wireless emergency alerts. And in today's episode, we will be talking about one of the most important tools that supports your response to emergencies, your emergency kit. By the end of today's episode, you will be able to understand the essential purpose of having an emergency kit and how it supports your safety and readiness both during and after emergencies. Identify the key items every kit should include. Recognize and understand how to adapt your kits for different locations and situations while meeting your unique needs. Feel confident that building or updating a kit is achievable in small, manageable steps, even while on a budget. And lastly, be motivated. We hope to take at least one action step towards assembling, checking, or customizing your own kit. And here to help guide us is a very special guest who serves at the Office of Preparedness and Response, often referred to as OP&R within the Maryland Department of Health. Our partnership with the department is what makes our meaningful work here at the EPN possible. So listeners, please join me in warmly welcoming OP&R's Director, Sara Barra. Sara has been with the Maryland Department of Health since 2007, working in many areas of health, including injury prevention, health policy and planning, chronic disease, operations, behavioral health, and preparedness and response. She has served many planning and response teams for efforts such as COVID-19 operations, the department's network incident response and continuity of operations, opioid response, and various infectious disease responses. Ms. Barra earned a Master's of Science degree in epidemiology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and is a certified public manager and certified business continuity professional. With her extensive experience and expertise, she brings a wealth of wisdom to the table of today's conversation. Sara, welcome. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to connect in conversation today about such an important topic.
So happy to be here. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful. Before we dive in, I'd love to share we are so grateful to have you, our listeners, here with us today as well. As your preparedness partners, we want you to remember that we're seated at the table with you in this conversation and in every conversation we have here on the podcast. And with that said, it feels important to stress that though Sara and I both serve in emergency preparedness roles, emergency kits aren't just for professionals. They're truly for everyone. And we're excited to help guide you today in learning how to build a kit that's just right for you and those you love. So, Sara, to start us off, I'd love for you to share with our listeners what an emergency kit is and how it's different from other kits, such as a first aid kit, for example.
Emergency supply kits are focused on helping you, your family, and your pets, very important, get through an extended event where outside help may not be readily available. So, this is very different from a first aid kit, which is focused on treating immediate injuries. That being said, you should have a first aid kit in your emergency supply kit. And then, just in general, you can be prepared by creating an emergency supply kit that includes items for yourself, your family, and for your pets for 3 or more days.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now that we understand what an emergency kit is, now let's explore its value. So, Sarah, could you share with our listeners then why having an emergency kit is such an important part of preparedness?
Certainly. So, having an emergency supply kit is an important part of preparedness because it pre-positions the items you are likely to need during an emergency. And we recommend keeping this kit in a sturdy, easy to carry backpack or duffel bag in an easy to access location, something you can get
Hmm.
to pretty quickly in case you need to evacuate your home. And we recommend this because this allows part of your home emergency kit to now be a go kit. You could even keep a small emergency kit in your car in case you need it while you're traveling.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to sharing more about that soon. So let's review. An emergency kit is a collection then of supplies that helps you respond to and recover from emergencies. And by having a kit, you and your loved ones can stay prepared with what you need when it matters most. So, speaking of when it matters most, Sarah, could you then share with us the types of situations where having a kit can make a real difference and how likely are these situations to happen?
Emergency supply kits are designed for when disaster or emergency disrupts normal services, which makes it difficult to access food, water, prescriptions, medical care. It could be due to a natural disaster like a flood or a tropical storm or a hurricane or a fire or a snowstorm, really depending upon your area of the state. It could
Hmm.
also be due to a power outage or some other disrupted utilities, which could happen anywhere. How often these situations occur really it depends on one, your local area, but two, also your circumstances. And so knowing your risk based on those two things is really important. For example, if you know that your area is prone to flooding, either where you live or where you travel, that would be a risk that you know about, that you live with, and you would want to plan for accordingly. The same is true for power or utility outage. So, for example, if you live in an area that experiences moderate or frequent outages, having that emergency supply kit allows you to pre-position the items that you would need in order to literally weather the storm. So the bottom line really is that preparing ahead of time allows you to be more resilient in these situations.
I appreciate you sharing that. It sounds like, again, to emphasize that knowing your risk impacts how you prepare. And so, hearing those examples just demonstrate how many different situations can cause for an emergency kit. So, now that we know why it's important and when it can be needed, let's talk about how to put one together. Could you walk us through then the key components that should be included in a well-stocked emergency kit?
Sure thing. So, first, I'd want to distinguish between your home emergency kit and your car emergency kit, just because you need different things depending on your circumstances. Car emergency kits are designed for being on the road and contain items that you may need in case you're stranded in transit. So, for example, having jumper cables or flares, an ice scraper, a cell phone charger for your car, blankets in your car, paper maps in case you're not able to access your phone, an empty gas can and funnel in case you run out of gas and need to get a refill, cat litter or sand or something that allows you to have better traction if you need to pull yourself out of a particular situation. A flashlight is another great example of something that you would want to have in that sort of situation. And then I would also recommend waters and snacks, things that would help being in the car easier, either day-to-day
Yes.
transit or during an emergency. Go bags are really designed to quickly grab essential supplies, especially if you need to evacuate. If you need to leave your house and go somewhere else, you would want to make sure that you had items like food and water. Make sure you're taking care of your pet. You have pet supplies like their carrier, their leash, their litter, food, water, bowls, that sort of thing. Same for children and other families. If you are transporting your children, make sure that you have the appropriate safety and comfort devices for them. Making sure that you have any medications that are needed either for
Hmm.
your family or again for your pets. Making sure that you have any sort of vital records that you would need. So ID, if you have any financial documents that you would need to keep a hold hold of medical documents like prescriptions in case you are away from your house and you need to get a refill. And then another item that I would recommend for your go bag would be cell phone and charger. Now, the other thing to say about any of these preparedness kits is that you should tailor them to your needs. So if there are other things that are essential for you or that make you or your family or your pets more comfortable, really consider bringing those along as well. And so finally, getting into home emergency kits, which again are designed to keep you, your family, your pets supplied for at least 3 days. There can be a lot of things in your home emergency kit. And again, you don't necessarily transport all of these with you if, say, you needed to evacuate, but these are definitely things that probably in your home already and can be easily pulled together for an emergency. In terms of food and water, again, really wanting to make sure you have 3 days of food, 3 days of water. Think about 1 gallon of water per person per day, plus, of course, what you would need for pets. Also think about, in terms of food, ready to eat items, canned meats, soups, beans, vegetables, fruit, really focusing on foods that really don't need a whole lot of cooking. If you don't have power for 3 days, you're probably not going to have access to your microwave. So again, really focusing on things that are not dependent upon cooking devices. But also be thinking about salt and pepper and sugar and spices, things that are going to make your food taste better. Again, this is a comfort thing. Also think about powdered milk, tea, instant coffee. Again, something that you can just add water to versus having to cook. High energy snacks, to think about nuts and protein bars and trail mix and peanut butter. Thinking about comfort foods, things that are going to make you feel better as you are weathering the storm. It could be granola, it could be dried fruit, it could be cookies and crackers and cocoa. Again, make sure that you're taking care of your family, particularly if they have any special dietary needs, thinking about foods for infants, any sort of special needs that folks may have, or if they're on a special diet. And then, of course, be thinking about your pets. Also be thinking about what you would put that food in or serve it on. So make sure that you have paper cups and plates and plastic utensils, as well as manual can opener. That's super important. But also be thinking about foil and plastic wrap, paper towels. Again, things that are just going to make it easier to utilize your food and water. So I'd like to pivot next into emergency supplies. And again, this is going to be a big list. And like anything else with emergency preparedness, you should really be thinking about, on this list, there are things that I'm going to need. There are things that I may not need. If you don't think that you're going to need them, you don't use them in your day-to-day, then you probably don't need them in your emergency supply kit. However, if you do, then these are really things to think about. And a lot of times they're already in your house anyway. Thinking about making sure that you have access to money, not just a credit or debit card, but actual cash and coins. If you need to go quickly, and again, there's no power, you're able to procure the supplies that you may need. Thinking about a radio, something to where you can get information, preferably it's battery powered, so that again, you're not depending upon a power dependent device. Flashlights, batteries. Again, making sure that you have access to your cell phone and a charger. There are some chargers that are bank chargers that you can source energy ahead of time on those. Also thinking about, of course, your first aid kit. Any sort of information that you might need about your surrounding area. So if you have paper maps, again, something that can easily go with you to your car if you needed to go somewhere else. Making sure that you have extra house and car keys. Again, if you have to evacuate, you want to make sure that you have those things for when you come back as a part of recovery. You always want to have a small fire extinguisher in your house just for day-to-day needs, but also good to have in your emergency supply kit. Any sort of tools to be able to turn off utilities, so whenever you get them back, they're not at full blast. Garbage bags with twist ties, toilet paper, any sort of towelettes, matches, any sort of personal care items. So toothpaste, toothbrushes, dental floss, deodorant, shampoo, any sort of supplies that make personal hygiene for you go. Of course, lip balm and sunscreen. If you have little ones, making sure that you have supplies for them. So diapers and bottles and formula if you are using formula. If you have pets, making sure that you have supplies for your pets, litter and all of their personal pet care items, making sure that you have at least one change of clothing and shoes per person. It's one, comfort, but it's two, making sure that you are also being able to dress for the season. If it's cold, put on extra layers. If you wear glasses, an extra pair of glasses. If you need sunglasses, making sure you have those. Again, important documents. So copies, for example, of your birth certificate or financial statements, legal documents, things that will help you recover easier once the situation has subsided. And then, like anything that we have listed out, because I've listed a lot of things, what's really important is that you should really tailor your emergency supply kit to you. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we have a full list of supplies for consideration on our website. And it might be good for folks
Mm-hmm.
just to be able to run through the list. And there are things that they may see and they're like, oh, that's a great idea. I don't want to keep people from that fantastic list because our folks have worked very hard over the years to compile that list. I want to make sure that that's available for folks.
Thank you so much. And happy to share that list in the show notes to look forward to that, our listeners. And thank you, just to reiterate, Sarah, for sharing about the three different kits. So your kit that remains at home, your Go kit, which seems to be a more portable version of your at-home kit in case you need to evacuate quickly, and then your car kit. I particularly appreciated the mentioning of the car kit for all of us operating a vehicle or being in a vehicle who someone else is operating, but particularly for our home care providers that are traveling in between clients. This is something incredibly important to think about. And then lastly, listing the emergency supply list as well. So I think it's important to highlight that while some items in an emergency kit are essential for everyone, as we mentioned, there are some items that do need to be tailored to your unique needs and even the current season that we're in. So Sarah, could you guide us through then what our listeners should be thinking about when it comes to customizing their emergency kit to meet their specific needs?
Certainly. So, the best advice I can provide is to ensure one, that you have your essentials. So, water, first aid supplies, hygiene supplies, things that you will need no matter what. But then tailoring the rest of the kit to your own needs and likes,
Mm-hmm.
because it is important, especially when it comes to food and that sort of thing. You like what's in your
Yeah.
emergency supply kit. So, for example, if you don't like peanut butter, don't include it in your kit. If you're not going to eat it, there's no reason for you to have it there. However, I would want you to be mindful to make a substitution for another high energy food, really making sure that you're tailoring the kits to your own needs. The same, I would say, would be true for any medical needs that you, your family, your pets have, making sure that you have access to those supplies. I think particularly for some of our home care listeners, also making sure that, for example, if you use oxygen, that you have some additional supply of oxygen, just as an example. I would also say making sure that you have any necessary medications on site. If you are able to keep a healthy supply, that you're able to do that accordingly. Also, I would recommend having a copy of the
Mm-hmm.
prescription available with you and to travel with you in case you have to evacuate or you have to be somewhere else and your medications are running low. That way we can make sure that you are getting a refill and that we're able to meet your needs. I would also say that if you have to leave, make sure that you have all of those vital records with you. So any
Mm-hmm.
of your medical records, any important legal documents like your birth certificate, just reiterating that having copies of these vital records that travel with you really makes it that much easier to recover and to be able to reestablish once you're able to
Mm.
return to your home. The other thing I would be mindful about when customizing kits is just to understand that if you're going to be in your home or really anywhere for an extended period of time, I'd recommend having items that keep you, your family, your pets occupied without electricity. So these are things like books and games and puzzles, something that just allows you to take your mind off things and not just stare at each other for 3 days.
I appreciate how you've emphasized the importance of customizing your kit in a way that it honors your safety, your health and wellness, but also your comfortability. So I appreciate you pointing that out. So now that we talked about how to create a kit that's just right for you, let's think about keeping it ready when you need it the most. So could you share with our listeners, once you've built your kit, how often should you be updating it? And what is the best way to store it so that it stays safe and easy to access?
Absolutely. And easy to access is it. If it's
Is
in
key.
the dark corner of your basement, it doesn't get remembered and therefore it doesn't get refreshed. So
Mm,
in terms of keeping these items, I recommend easy to carry containers that are hopefully easy also to see through, like plastic bins as an example, or duffel bags. Either allow for easy to carry, but plastic bins allow you to easily see and carry. And then of course storing in a clean, dry location. What I'd recommend for your longer term food storage, you need to be looking every 6 months at your powdered milk, at your dried fruits and crackers and some of those items. And then looking every year at some of your longer term items like your canned items, peanut butter, jams and jellies,
Mm-hmm.
canned nuts, that sort of thing. I would also say that a good practice would also be to be cycling through some of these items as you're utilizing them in your day to day life. If you are a diehard peanut butter and jelly user, when you buy your new peanut butter and jelly, put it in your supply kit and take the old one out and then use that. And that way you continually cycle through. Some longer term items that can be stored in airtight containers, again, away from heat. Things like vegetable oil, baking powder, dried beans, instant coffees and teas, salt, sugar, spices, bouillon, dry pastas, some of those dried items. But then looking at all of your other emergency supplies, my recommendation is to review them once a year. You're looking for expiration dates, but you're also looking for any sort of signs of damage or corrosion. What I would also point out with refreshing your emergency supply kit is that this is also an opportunity to refresh your family on one, how to use the items in the kit, but also to have the conversation about your family emergency communication plan. So using this opportunity with your emergency supply kit to also be able to talk about emergency preparedness with your family.
I appreciate that. So it sounds like it's not only just about what's in your kit, but it's also refreshing yourself on how to use the items that are in your kit. And a phrase that you shared in the beginning of the conversation was, it must be remembered in order to be refreshed. And I think that's something to emphasize, and that's what stood out to me. So thank you for sharing that. You had mentioned a family communication plan, and I wanted to share with our listeners, for those of you who want to learn more about what a family communications plan is and how to make one, you can check out an earlier episode of our podcast featuring the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, where we do a deep dive into that very topic. And so now that we talked about what goes into building an emergency kit, how to make it your own, and when to refresh it, it may feel like a big leap for some folks. And accessibility for us here at the EPN is a priority. And so, Sara, I would love to learn from you. What advice would you share for our listeners, for those who are ready to take that first leap today, but want to do so in a way that feels reachable?
Certainly. So, taking the first step is starting with the things that you already have in your home. If you already have bottled water in your home, if you already have first aid items and maybe
Mm-hmm.
even a first aid kit, if you already have toiletries and hygiene products, if you already have peanut butter and jelly in your pantry, you are already building your emergency supply kit. So you're already on your way. It's really about building out that supply kit based on your needs and preferences. And again, we have a resource that provides more examples of emergency supply items that your listeners could use to run through and mark if these items are good for them. And if they are, then you can build them one by one. You don't have to have everything ready yesterday. These are things that you can build incrementally while keeping in mind the things that not only you need, but the things that will keep you comfortable and the things that will keep you occupied. Again, you, your family, and your pets.
It sounds like starting with what you have makes preparedness not only practical, but it makes it reachable. And I think when you pair that with the right knowledge, you then are equipped to turn those tools that we talked about into action. And that's just the kind of confidence we want everyone to walk away with today after listening to the episode. So, speaking of tools, Sara, could you share with our listeners any available tools that we've touched on throughout the episode and resources that could support them in creating their own emergency kit?
Certainly. So we have several resources available on our website, and that's health.maryland.gov/preparedness. And again, we'll make sure that you have that to be able to share with your listeners. So there is a recommended supply list for your emergency supply kit. There are also a number of other resources on our website that your listeners could look at before, during, and after emergencies. There are also other websites that can provide additional information that you need. You talked about family emergency communication planning. We have some resources, as does Maryland Department of Emergency Management. There are resources on ready.gov. And then, of course, there are resources on EPN's website.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just great to know and comforting to know that there are tools that are readily available and accessible to guide us on our way. And I also think it's important to remember that even the best stocked kits start with just one item at a time. So, to our listeners, we applaud your courage to begin. And with that being said, Sarah, as we begin to close our conversation for today, do you have any last words of wisdom to share with our listeners?
So I would put forth that I think most of your listeners already are building and have some sort of an
Yeah.
emergency supply kit in their home. They may not realize that they have it, but they do, just in terms of the food they have in their pantry and the clothes they have at their house and hygiene products and water that they keep on hand. I know we went through a rather exhaustive listing of emergency supplies that can be in an emergency supply kit. Don't think that you have to have everything together at once. You already have a lot of things already in your home, and this is just an opportunity to build upon that. And I would just say in general that preparedness starts with the first step, and each step builds upon the last. And so every time you take one step more in the world of preparedness, you're one step closer to being ready to respond and recover.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think a thought that was coming up for me as we were chatting is that preparedness is an innate skill. And I think our role at the EPN, but also at OP&R, is to help our Marylanders enhance a skill that already exists, to strengthen a skill that already exists that we engage with every day. So I just appreciate that encouragement that we can do what we can with what we have where we are, knowing and being confident in the fact that we have those skills within us that we're just continuing to practice because practice makes progress. So I appreciate this so much. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Preparedness in Your Pocket. I hope today's conversation helped you feel more confident about creating an emergency kit that truly fits your unique needs. And as your preparedness partners, we want to remind you that whether you're building your kit for the first time or updating your current one, you're not doing it alone. We are here with you every step of the way, and you are warmly welcome to reach out to each of us. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a joy to connect with you today. And until next time, all stay safe, stay prepared, and take good care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Preparedness in Your Pocket. This podcast is brought to you by the Maryland Emergency Preparedness Network, formed in partnership with the Maryland National Capital Home Care Association and the Office of Preparedness and Response within the Maryland State Health Department. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Kendal Lee, the EPN's Program Administrator, and edited by Frankie Cirquetti of Storia Studio. Our hope is to meet your curiosity with content that boosts your confidence and strengthens your preparedness. At the EPN, we truly believe that sharing is caring, and so we invite you to subscribe, like our podcast, and share it with friends, family, colleagues, or anyone in the community so that we may all empower each other's preparedness. Please note that the information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to serve as legal or professional advice. While our discussions may include topics and products offered by the participating organizations, listeners should consult with relevant professionals or authorities for specific guidance and recommendations. The views expressed by our guests may reflect those of the hosting organization, though are not intended to replace official advice or guidelines. We can't wait to connect with you again. Until then, stay prepared and take good care.